Hey everybody, I know I promised you that Mrs. Baldwin would be reading the next couple chapters, but her computer is all sorts messed up right now. So we're getting it fixed. But until then, I wanted to make sure that you guys had availability for the next couple chapters that we're going to be discussing tomorrow on our video conference for our new book that we're reading. So I'm going to pick up Mrs. Baldwin's stuff for today. We're going to read chapters 7 through 9. So here we go. Chapter 7. The shovel felt heavy in Stanley's soft, fleshy hands. He tried to jam it into the earth, but the blade banged against the ground and bounced off without making a dent. The vibrations ran up the shaft of the shovel and into Stanley's wrists, making his bones rattle. It was still dark. The only light came from the moon and the stars, more stars than Stanley had ever seen before. It seems that he had only gotten to sleep when Mr. Pendanski came in and woke everybody up. Using all his might, he brought the shovel back down onto the dry lake bed. The force stung his hands, but made no impression on the earth. He wondered if he had a defective shovel. He glanced at Zero, about 15 feet away, who scooped out a shovel full of dirt and dumped it on a pile that was already almost a foot tall. For breakfast, they'd been served some kind of lukewarm cereal. The best part was the orange juice. They each got a pint carton. The cereal actually didn't taste too bad. Just smelled like his cod. Then they filled their canteens, got their shovels, and were marched out across the lake. Each group was assigned a different area. The shovels were kept in a shed near the showers. They all looked the same to Stanley, although X-Ray had his own special shovel, which no one else was allowed to use. X-Ray claimed it was shorter than the others, but if it was only by a fraction of an inch. The shovels were 5 feet long from the tip of the steel blade to the end of the wooden shaft. Stanley's hole would have to be as deep as his shovel, and he'd have to be able to lay the shovel flat across the bottom in any direction, which was why X-Ray wanted the shortest shovel. The lake was so full of holes and mounds that it reminded Stanley of pictures he'd seen of the moon. If you find anything interesting or unusual, Mr. Pendanski had told him, you should report it either to me or Mr. Sir when we come around with the water truck. If the warden likes what you found, you'll get the rest of the day off. What are we supposed to be looking for? Stanley asked him. Well, you're not looking for anything. You're digging to build character. It's just if you find anything, the warden would like to know about it. He glanced helplessly at his shovel. It wasn't defective. He was defective. He noticed a thin crack in the ground. He placed the point of his shovel on top of it, then jumped on the back of the shovel with both feet. The shovel sank a few inches into the packed earth. He smiled. For once in his life, it paid to be overweight. He leaned on the shaft and pried up on his first shovel full of dirt, then dumped it off to the side. Only 10 million more to go, he thought. Then he placed the shovel back in the crack and jumped on it again. He unearthed several shovelfuls of dirt in this manner before it occurred to him that he had dumped his dirt within the perimeter of his hole. He laid his shovel flat on the ground and marked where the edges of his hole would be. 5 feet was awfully wide. He moved the dirt he'd already dug up past his mark. He took a drink from his canteen. 5 feet would be awfully deep, too. The digging got easier after a while. The ground was hardest at the surface, where the sun had baked a crust about 8 inches deep. Beneath that, the earth was looser. But by the time Stanley broke past the crust, a blister had formed in the middle of his right thumb, and it hurt to hold the shovel. Stanley's great-great-grandfather was named Elia Yelnats. He was born in Latvia. When he was 15 years old, he fell in love with Mira. He didn't know he was Stanley's great-great-grandfather at the time. Mira was 14. She would turn 15 in 2 months, at which time her father had decided she should be married. Elia went to her father to ask for her hand. but so did Igor Borkov, a pig farmer. Igor was 57 years old. He had a red nose and fat, puffy cheeks. I'll trade you my fattest pig for your daughter, Igor offered. And what have you got? Mira's father asked Elia. A heart full of love, said Elia. I'd rather have a fat pig, said Mira's father. Desperate, Elia went to see Madame Zeroni, an old Egyptian woman who lived at the edge of town. He had become friends with her, though she was quite a bit older than him. She was even older than Igor Barkov. The other boys in the village liked to mud wrestle. Elia preferred visiting Madame Zeroni and listening to her many stories. Madame Zeroni had dark skin and a very wide mouth. When she looked at you, her eyes seemed to expand, and you felt like she was looking right through you. Elia, what's wrong? She asked, before he even told her he was upset. She was sitting in a homemade wheelchair. She had no left foot. Her leg stopped at her ankle. I'm in love with Mira Menka, Elia confessed, but Igor Barkov has offered to trade his fattest pig for her. I can't compete with that. Good, said Madame Zeroni. You're too young to get married. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Oh, but I love Mira. Mira's head is as empty as a flower pot. But she's so beautiful. So is a flower pot. Can she push a plow? Can she milk a goat? No, she is too delicate. Can she even have an intelligent conversation? No, she is silly and foolish. Will she take care of you when you are sick? No, she is spoiled and will only want you to take care of her. So she is beautiful. So what? Ptwee! Madame Zeroni spat on the dirt. She told Elia that he should go to America. Like my son, that's where your future lies, not with Mira Menke. But Elia would hear none of it. He was 15, and all he could see was Mira's shallow beauty. Madame Zeroni hated to see Elia so forlorn. Against her better judgment, she agreed to help him. It just so happens my sow gave birth to a litter of piglets yesterday, she said. There is one little runt whom she won't suckle. You may have him. He would die anyway. Madame Zeroni led Elia around the back of her house where she kept her pigs. Elia took the tiny piglet, but he didn't see what good it would do him. It wasn't much bigger than a rat. He'll grow, Madame Zeroni assured him. Do you see that mountain on the edge of the forest? Yes, said Elia. On the top of that mountain there is a stream where the water runs uphill. You must carry the piglet every day to the top of the mountain and let it drink from the stream. As it drinks, you are to sing to him. She taught Elia a special song to sing to the pig. On the day of Mira's 15th birthday, you should carry the pig up the mountain for the last time. Then take it directly to Mira's father. It will be fatter than any of Igor's pigs. If it is that big and fat, said Elia, how will I be able to carry it up the mountain? The piglet is not too heavy for you now, is it? Asked Madame Zeroni. Well, of course not, said Elia. Do you think it will be too heavy for you tomorrow? No. Every day you will carry the pig up the mountain. It will get a little bigger, but you will get a little stronger. After you give the pig to Mira's father, I want you to do one more thing for me. Anything, said Elia. I want you to carry me up the mountain. I want to drink from the stream, and I want you to sing the song to me. Elia promised he would. Madame Zeroni warned him that if he failed to do this, he and his descendants would be doomed for all eternity. At the time, Elia thought nothing of the curse. He was just a 15-year-old kid, and eternity didn't seem much longer than a week from Tuesday. Besides, he liked Madame Zeroni and would be glad to carry her up the mountain. He would have done it right then and there, but he wasn't strong enough yet. Stanley was still digging. His hole was about 3 feet deep, but only in the center. It sloped upwards to the edges. The sun had only just come up over the horizon, but he could already feel its hot rays against his face. As he reached down to pick up his canteen, he felt a sudden rush of dizziness and put his hands on his knees to steady himself. For a moment, he was afraid he would throw up, but the moment passed. He drank the last drop of water from his canteen. He had blisters on every one of his fingers and one in the center of each palm. Everyone else's hole was a lot deeper than his. He couldn't actually see their holes, but could tell by the size of their dirt piles. He saw one cloud of dust moving across the wasteland and noticed that the other boys had stopped digging and were watching it too. The dirt cloud moved closer, and he could see that it trailed behind a red pickup truck. The truck stopped near where he was digging, and the boys lined up behind it. X-ray in front, Zero at the rear. Stanley got in line behind Zero. Mr. Sir filled each of their canteens from a tank of water in the bed of the pickup. As he took Stanley's canteen from him, he said, "This isn't the Girl Scouts, is it?" Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. Mr. Sir followed Stanley back to his hole to see how he was doing. "You better get with it," he said, "or else you're going to be digging in the hottest part of the day." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, deftly removed the shells with his teeth, and spat them into Stanley's hole. Every day, Elia carried the little piglet up the mountain and sang to it as it drank from the stream. As the pig grew fatter, Elia grew stronger. On the day of Mira's 15th birthday, Elia's pig weighed over 50 stones. Madame Zeroni had told him to carry the pig up the mountain on that day as well, but Elia didn't want to present himself to Mira smelling like a pig. Instead, he took a bath. It was his second bath in less than a week. Then he led the pig to Mira's. Igor Barkov was there with his pig as well. "These are two of the finest pigs I have ever seen," Mira's father declared. He was so impressed with Elia, who seemed to have grown bigger and stronger in the last 2 months. "I used to think you were a good-for-nothing book reader," he said, "but I see now you could be an excellent mud wrestler." "May I marry your daughter?" Elia boldly asked. "First, I must weigh the pigs." Alas, poor Elia should have carried his pig up the mountain one last time. The two pigs weighed exactly the same. Stanley's blisters had ripped open, and new blisters formed. He kept changing his grip on the shovel to try to avoid the pain. Finally, he removed his cap and held it between the shafts of his shovel and his raw hands. It helped, but digging was harder because the cap would slip and slide. The sun beat down on his unprotected head and neck. Though he tried to convince himself otherwise, he'd been aware for a while that his piles of dirt were too close to his hole. The piles were outside of his 5-foot circle, but he could see he was going to run out of room. Still, he pretended otherwise and kept adding more dirt to the piles that he would eventually have to move. The problem was that when the dirt was in the ground, it was compacted. It expanded when it was excavated. The piles were a lot bigger than his hole was deep. It was either now or later. Reluctantly, he climbed up out of his hole and once again dug his shovel into his previously dug dirt. Mira's father got down on his hands and knees and closely examined each pig, tail to snout. "Those are two of the finest pigs I have ever seen," he said at last. "How am I to decide? I have only one daughter." "Why not let Mira decide?" suggested Elia. "That's preposterous!" exclaimed Igor, expelling saliva as he spoke. "Mira is just an empty-headed girl," said her father. "How can she possibly decide when I, her father, cannot?" She knows how she feels in her heart, said Elia. Mira's father rubbed his chin. Then he laughed and said, Why not? He slapped Elia on the back. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig. He summoned his daughter. Elia blushed when Mira entered the room. Good afternoon, Mira, he said. She looked at him. You're Elia, right? She asked. Mira, said her father, Elia and Igor have each offered a pig for your hand in marriage. It doesn't matter to me. A pig is a pig. So I will let you make the choice. Whom do you wish to marry? Mira looked confused. You want me to decide? That's right, my blossom, said her father. Gee, I don't know, said Mira. Which pig weighs more? They both weigh the same, said her father. Golly, said Mira, I guess I'd choose Elia. No, Igor. No, Elia. No, Igor. Oh, I know. I think of a number between 1 and 10. I'll marry whoever guesses the closest number. Okay, I'm ready. 10, guessed Igor. Elia said nothing. Elia, said Mira, what number do you guess? Elia didn't pick a number. Marry Igor, he muttered. You can keep my pig as a wedding present. The next time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski, who also brought sack lunches. Stanley sat with his back against a pile of dirt and ate. He had a bologna sandwich, potato chips, and a large chocolate chip cookie. How you doing? Asked Magnet. Not real good, said Stanley. Well, the first hole's the hardest, Magnet said. Stanley took a long, deep breath. He couldn't afford to dawdle. He was way behind the others, and the sun just kept getting hotter. It wasn't even noon yet. But he didn't know if he had the strength to stand up. He thought about quitting. He wondered what they would do to him. What could they do to him? His clothes were soaked with sweat. In school, he had learned that sweating was good for you. It was nature's way of keeping you cool. So why was he so hot? Using his shovel for support, he managed to get to his feet. Where are we supposed to go to the bathroom? He asked Magnet. Magnet gestured with his arms to a great expanse around them. Pick a hole, any hole, he said. Stanley staggered across the lake, almost falling over a dirt pile. Behind him, he heard Magnet say, but first, make sure there's nothing living in it. After leaving Mira's house, Elia wandered aimlessly through the town until he found himself down by the wharf. He sat on the edge of a pier and stared down into the cold, black water. He could not understand how Mira had trouble deciding between him and Igor. He thought she loved him. Even if she didn't love him, couldn't she see what a foul person Igor was? It was like Madame Zeroni had said. Her head was as empty as a flower pot. Some men were gathering on another dock, and he went to see what was going on. A sign read, Deckhands Wanted, Free Passage to America. He had no sailing experience, but the ship's captain signed him aboard. The captain could see that Elia was a man of great strength. Not everybody could carry a full-grown pig up the side of a mountain. It wasn't until the ship had cleared the harbor and he was heading across the Atlantic that he suddenly remembered his promise to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain. He felt terrible. He wasn't afraid of the curse. He thought that was a lot of nonsense. He felt bad because he knew Madame Zeroni had wanted to drink from the stream before she died. Zero was the smallest kid in Group D, but he was the first one to finish digging. You're finished? Stanley asked enviously. Zero said nothing. Time out.
Can I please finish my choice board before we do the time?
Yes, and you need to wait till I'm done with this before you come down for that, okay? Okay, love you, bye. Where were we? Oh, you're You're finished? Stanley asked enviously. Zero said nothing. Stanley walked to Zero's hole and watched him measure it with his shovel. The top of his hole was a perfect circle. The sides were smooth and steep. Not one dirt clod more than necessary had been removed from the earth. Zero pulled himself up to the surface. He didn't even smile. He looked down at his perfectly dug hole, spat in it, then turned and headed back to the camp compound. Zero's one weird dude, said Zigzag. Stanley would have laughed, but he didn't have the strength. Zigzag had to be the weirdest dude Stanley had ever seen. He had a long, skinny neck and a big round head with a wild, frizzy blonde hair that stuck out in all directions. His head seemed to bob up and down on his neck like it was on a spring. Armpit was the second to finish digging. He also spat in his hole before heading back to the camp compound. One by one, Stanley watched each of the boys spit in his hole and return to the camp compound. Stanley kept digging. His hole was almost up to his shoulders, although it was hard to tell exactly where ground level was because his dirt pile completely surrounded the hole. The deeper he got, the harder it was. Turn the page. The deeper he got, the harder it was to raise the dirt up and out of the hole. Once again, he realized he was going to have to move the piles. His cap was stained with blood from his hands. He felt like he was digging his own grave. Excuse me. In America, Elia learned to speak English. He fell in love with a woman named Sarah Miller. She could push a plow, milk a goat, and most importantly, think for herself. She and Elia often stayed up half the night talking and laughing together. Their life was not easy. Elia worked hard, but bad luck seemed to follow him everywhere. He always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remembered Madame Zeroni telling him that she had a son in America. Elia was forever looking for him. He'd walk up to complete strangers and ask if they knew someone named Zeroni, or had ever heard of anyone named Zeroni. No one did. Elia wasn't sure what he'd do if he ever found Madame Zeroni's son anyways. Carry him up a mountain and sing him the pig lullaby? After his barn was struck by lightning for the third time, he told Sarah about his broken promise to Madame Zeroni. I'm worse than a pig thief, he said. You should leave me and find someone who isn't cursed. I'm not leaving you, said Sarah, but I want you to do one thing for me. Anything, said Elia. Sarah smiled. Sing me the pig lullaby. He sang it for her. Her eyes sparkled. That's so pretty. What does it mean? Elia tried his best to translate it from Latvian into English, but it wasn't the same. It rhymes in Latvian, he told her. I could tell, said Sarah. A year later, their child was born. Sarah named him Stanley because she noticed that Stanley was Yelnats spelled backwards. Sarah changed the words of the pig lullaby so that they rhymed, and every night she sang it to little Stanley. If only, the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the tree were as soft as the skies, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, crying to the moon, if only, if only. Stanley's hole was as deep as his shovel, but not quite wide enough on the bottom. He grimaced as he sliced off a chunk of dirt, then raised it up and flung it onto the pile. He laid his shovel back down on the bottom of his hole, and, to his surprise, it fit. He rotated it and only had to chip off a few chunks of dirt here and there before it would lie flat across his hole in every direction. He heard the water truck approaching. He felt a strange sense of pride at being able to show Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski that he had dug his first hole. He put his hands on the rim and tried to pull himself up. He couldn't do it. His arms were too weak to lift his heavy body. He used his legs to help, but he just didn't have any strength. He was trapped in his hole. It was almost funny, but he wasn't in the mood to laugh. Stanley! He heard Mr. Pendanski call. Using his shovel, he dug 2 footholds in the hole of the wall. He climbed out to see Mr. Pendanski walking over to him. I was afraid you'd fainted, Mr. Pendanski said. You wouldn't have been the first. I'm finished, Stanley said, putting his blood-spotted cap back on his head. All right, said Mr. Pendanski, raising his hand for a high five. But Stanley ignored it. He didn't have the strength. Mr. Pendanski lowered his hand and looked down at Stanley's hole. Well done, he said. You want to ride back? Stanley shook his head. I'll walk. Mr. Pendanski climbed back into the truck without filling Stanley's canteen. Stanley waited for him to drive away, then took another look at his hole. He knew it was nothing to be proud of, but he felt proud nonetheless. He sucked up his last bit of saliva and spat. Excuse me. Chapter 8. A lot of people don't believe in curses. A lot of people don't believe in yellow-spotted lizards either. But if one bites you, it doesn't make a difference whether you believe in it or not. Actually, it is kind of odd that scientists named the lizard after its yellow spots. Each lizard has exactly 11 yellow spots, but the spots are hard to see on its yellow-green body. The lizard is from 6 to 10 inches long and has big red eyes. In truth, its eyes are yellow, and its skin around the eyes, which is red, but everyone always speaks of its red eyes. It also has black teeth and a milky white tongue. Looking at one, you would have thought that it should have been named a red-eyed lizard, or a black-toothed lizard, or perhaps a white-tongued lizard. If you've ever been close enough to see the yellow spots, you're probably dead. Yellow-spotted lizards like to live in holes, which offer shade from the sun and protects from predatory birds. Up to 20 lizards may live in one hole. They have strong, powerful legs and can leap out of very deep holes to attack their prey. They eat small animals, insects, certain cactus thorns, and the shells of sunflower seeds. Chapter 9. Stanley stood in the shower and let the cold water pour over his hot and sore body. It was 4 minutes of heaven. For the second day in a row, he didn't use soap. He was too tired. There was no roof over the shower building, and the walls were raised up 6 inches off the ground, except in the corners. There was no drain in the floor. The water just ran out under the walls and evaporated quickly in the sun. He put on his clean set of orange clothes. He returned to his tent, put his dirty clothes in his crate, got out his pen and box of stationery, and headed to the rec room. A sign on the door said Rec Room, spelled W-R-E-C-K. Nearly everything in the room was broken. The TV, the pinball machine, the furniture, even the people looked broken, with their worn-out bodies sprawled over various chairs and sofas. X-Ray and Armpit were playing pool. The surface of the table reminded Stanley of the surface of the lake. It was full of lumps and holes because so many people had carved their initials into the felt. There was a hole in the far wall, and an electric fan had been placed in front of it. Cheap air conditioning. At least the fan worked. As Stanley made his way across the room, he tripped over an outstretched leg. Hey, watch it, said an orange lump on the chair. You watch it, muttered Stanley, too tired to care. What'd you say? The lump demanded. Nothing, said Stanley. The lump rose. He was almost as big as Stanley and a lot tougher. You said something. He poked his fat finger in Stanley's neck. What'd you say? A crowd quickly formed around them. Be cool, said X-Ray. He put his hands on Stanley's shoulder. You don't want to mess with the caveman, he warned. The caveman's cool, said Armpit. I'm not looking for trouble, Stanley said. I'm just tired, that's all. The lump grunted. X-Ray and Armpit led Stanley over to a couch. Squid slid over to make room as Stanley sat down. Did you see the caveman back there? X-Ray asked. The caveman's one tough dude, said Squid, and he lightly punched Stanley's arm. Stanley leaned back against the torn vinyl upholstery. Despite his shower, his body still radiated heat. I wasn't trying to start anything, he said. The last thing he wanted to do after killing himself all day in a lake was to get in a fight with a boy called the Caveman. He was glad X-Ray and Armpit had come to his rescue. Well, how'd you like your first hole? Asked Squid. Stanley groaned and the other boys laughed. Well, the first hole's the hardest, said Stanley. No way, said X-Ray. The second hole's a lot harder. You're hurting before you even get started. You think you're sore now? Just wait and see how you feel tomorrow morning, right? That's right, said Squid. Plus, the fun's gone, said X-Ray. The fun? Asked Stanley. Don't lie to me, said X-Ray. I bet you always wanted to dig a big hole, right? Am I right? Stanley had never really thought about it before, but he knew better than to tell X-Ray he wasn't right. Every kid in the world wants to dig a great big hole, said X-Ray. To China, right? Right, said Stanley. See what I mean? Said X-Ray. That's what I'm saying. But now the fun's gone, and you still gotta do it again and again and again and Camp Fun and Games, said Stanley. What's in the box? Asked Squid. Stanley had forgotten he had brought it. Paper. I was going to write a letter to my mother. Your mother? Laughed Squid. She'll worry if I don't. Squid scowled. Stanley looked around the room. This was the one place in the camp where the boys could enjoy themselves. And what did they do? They wrecked it. The glass on the TV was smashed as if someone had put his foot through it. Every table and chair seemed to be missing at least one leg. Everything leaned. He waited to write the letter until after Squid had gotten up and joined the game of pool. Dear Mom, today was my first day at camp, and I have already made some friends. We've been out on the lake all day, so I'm pretty tired. Once I pass the swimming test, I'll get to learn how to water ski. He stopped writing as he became aware that somebody was reading over his shoulder. He turned to see Zero, standing behind the couch. I don't want her to worry about me, he explained. Zero said nothing. He just stared at the letter with a serious, almost angry look on his face. Stanley slipped it back into the stationery box. Did the shoes have a red X on the back? Zero asked him. It took Stanley a moment, but then he realized Zero was talking about Clyde Livingston's shoes. Yes, they did, he said. He wondered how Zero knew that. Brand X was a popular brand of sneakers. Maybe Clyde Livingston made a commercial for them. Zero stared at him for a moment with the same intensity with which he had been staring at the letter. Stanley poked his finger through a hole in the vinyl couch and pulled out some stuffing. He wasn't aware of what he was doing. Come on, caveman, dinner, said Armpit. You coming, caveman? Said Squid. Stanley looked around to see that Armpit and Squid were talking to him. Sure, he said. He put the piece of stationery back into the box and got up and followed the boys out of the tables. The lump wasn't the caveman. He was. He shrugged his left shoulder. It was better than barf bag. That is the end of chapter 9. Next Monday, we will pick the book up on chapter 10. But don't forget, tomorrow, Thursday, we are going to have a video conference at, what time? I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'll have to get the information out to you. I will send out an email. I will put it on Facebook. I will put it in Google Classroom. I'll do all those things. Make sure that everybody has the information. It'll be really easy. You'll just need to click on the link, and it will take you straight to the meeting. If you have a smartphone, use that. If you're using one of the Google Chromebooks, use those. If you have a computer with a camera like I do, use that. If you don't have anything that can get on the internet to join, there's going to be a phone number that you can call as well. It works really, really well. You won't be able to see everybody, but you'll still be able to hear. Tomorrow, we're going to be going through the first section of the study guide, chapters 1 through 6, I believe. Maybe it's 1 through 9. We're going to do chapters 1 through 9. Everything we've read so far. So make sure you've seen both videos. Hopefully you guys had a chance today to go pick up your packet from Mrs. Baldwin. If not, it should be showing up on the bus here real soon. So, until I actually get to see you tomorrow, yay! Stay safe, stay healthy, stay home. Love you guys. Talk to you tomorrow.